The title of my message is Christmas is the Story of Redemption. Christmas is the story of redemption. It's the story of redemption. So Matthew chapter 1. When you read Matthew, he begins sharing his eyewitness of who Jesus is. He wants to talk about who Jesus is, and he writes his accounts, his perspective, his experience with Jesus. And that's why he writes the book of Matthew. It was a letter, so that he could, in detail, write all the incidents that he knows and that he had with Jesus. And Matthew chapter 1 is unique because he begins to talk about Jesus by sharing the lineage of Jesus. Because in those times it was important that when you talk about a character, you also talk about the family tree from which this character is coming from. And he begins right from the top, right from Adam, the son of God. And then he says Adam gave birth to this, and this person fathered this person, and so on and so forth. He comes down to the lineage of Jesus. But what I find interesting, and which really blew my mind 10 years ago when I read that account of genealogy, was the mention of 4 women. It's unusual because when you write a lineage, when you write a genealogy, when you make a record of it, you don't talk about women. We come from a patriarchal society, and in a society such as that, you only talk about the men. So if you read Genesis and you see all the genealogies that are mentioned, you never find the mention of women. It only talks about men. But in this one, this is special because it talks about 4 women very specifically. The first one is Tamar. The second is Rahab. The third is Ruth. And the fourth is Bathsheba. You know, what's interesting about these 4 women are none of them were Jewish. Doesn't that give us hope? That Jesus came from a lineage that has Gentile women. They were not Jewish. They did not have a covenant with God. They did not have the promises of God. But yet they were included in the family tree of Jesus. What does that say? That you and me have hope. That we were always included in the plan of God. We were not an afterthought. We were always included in the plan of God. Always. And the other thing about these women is they had a questionable past. Each one of them had a questionable past. Either they came from a questionable background or they came from a questionable past. Let's talk about the first one, Tamar. Tamar was a Canaanite. And she was married to Judah's older son. If you remember the story of Judah, Judah is the son of Jacob. Jacob is the son of Isaac. Isaac is the son of Abraham. Judah's son, the oldest son, was married to Tamar. But the older son was so wicked that the Bible says that the Lord killed him. He was wicked. And because he died, now what happened in that culture was that women had no rights to property. They never had rights to inheritance. So the only way that they were protected and they were taken care of was when they were married, because the rights that the husband had, they shared in those rights. So Judah, as the father-in-law of Tamar, it was his responsibility to take care of Tamar when his son died. So what he did was, and which was very common in that culture, what he did was he asked his second son to marry Tamar. So his second son marries Tamar, and the Bible says that even he was wicked, so the Lord kills him. Tamar marries 2 sons of Judah, and both of them die. Think about what she is going through. Man, am I the Jonah in the story? And then Judah has a third son who's very young. He's a child. And Judah tells Tamar, when this child is old enough to get married, I'll get him married. But for now, you go back to your parents. But Judah had no intention of fulfilling that promise. He just wanted to get rid of her. So what Tamar does is, this is interesting because I can't wrap my head around it. What Tamar does is she pretends to be a prostitute and has sex with her father-in-law, and then is forced to get married to her father-in-law. And from that son is the lineage. Can you think about it? Here we talk about the righteousness of God and look at the background history from where Jesus comes from. She pretended to be a prostitute. Who does that? But Judah says what she did was righteous. Because even though her approach was wrong, she did it for justice. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to make sense of this. But what I'm trying to tell you is, she is somebody who had a questionable past. She comes from a questionable background. The next story is the story of Rahab. She was not pretending to be a prostitute. She was a prostitute. Her career was a prostitute. She was into prostitution. Yet the Lord remembers her so that she could be put in the account of Jesus' family line. She was also a Canaanite who was a prostitute, but she gave birth to Boaz. And Boaz marries Ruth. Ruth in the Bible is, celebrated as a good character, if you know. But Ruth comes from a country called Moab. The Moabites were cursed people. And they were cursed because they came as a result of an incest relationship between Lot and his daughter. I'm talking so much about sex today. But you try to understand the background that they are coming from. Moabites were cursed. Ruth is a Moabite, and Ruth marries Boaz now. Ruth becomes the great-great-grandmother of Jesus. The fourth one is Bathsheba. You know Bathsheba, like her name says it all. Bathsheba. Yeah, she's popular for her shower. Like King David had an adulterous relationship with Bathsheba when she was the wife of Uriah. And what I like about the Bible is, the Bible does not hide things. It just says things as it is. Even when it is mentioning Bathsheba, it doesn't mention her by name. It says the wife of Uriah. Abraham did crazy things. He lied 2 times and still he's called the father of faith. David had an adulterous relationship with this woman and God calls him a man after my own heart. You see where I'm going? The Bible is not scared in revealing people's weaknesses, and still the Lord does not turn his face away from them. These 4 women had a questionable past and a questionable background, yet they were listed in the names in the family tree of Jesus. What does that say? That whatever your past is, God has the ability and the integrity to redeem that. God can redeem your past. I'm reminded of Joseph, who did not rape anybody, but he lost his reputation and he was accused of rape. He was branded as a rapist for many years in the prison. Imagine that. And one day, God restores him to become a prime minister.